This is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Grace Shin. Tonight's top stories from East Asia. China says it has successfully test-fired a nuclear-capable missile from a submarine in the Pacific Ocean, drawing protests and raising concerns across the region. And Australia and Fiji sign a new mutual defense treaty against the backdrop of China's growing influence in the Pacific. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi begins a three-nation Indo Pacific tour with defense high on the agenda as New Delhi deepens its engagement in the region. And South Korea bets on a global yuan, launching historic round-the-clock trading in a bid to draw more foreign investors. Also ahead, Taiwan has built its reputation on making chips that power the world's most advanced technology, but it's also making a name for itself with something completely different: whiskey. We find out what's behind the spirit's remarkable rise. And South Korean football chief Chung Mong-gyu steps down after the country's early World Cup exit sparked angry calls for reform. Is this the fresh start fans are calling for? China has test-fired an intercontinental ballistic missile armed with a dummy warhead into the Pacific Ocean. The launch drew alarm from nearby countries. Australia branded the move destabilizing, while New Zealand said it was not consistent with regional stability. The Chinese Navy says the missile test was routine and relevant countries were notified in advance. Beijing also clarified that the launch was not directed at any specific country or target. China last tested an ICBM back in the year of 2024, and today's launch was carried out from a submarine in the Pacific Ocean. The Navy says the missile accurately landed in the designated area. MOFA says the launch complied with both international law and practices. Regional powers, however, have conveyed strong concerns.
これに対しては我が方から中国の軍事活動が活発化していることへの深刻な懸念を伝達したところです。政府としては我が国及び地域の安全保障の観点から今般のミサイル発射には懸念を有しており、引き続き警戒監視活動に万全を期すとともに関連の動静を注視してまいります。
Australia has been clear that this proposed test is in the context of a rapid military build-up by China, which is lacking in the transparency and reassurance as to intent that the region expects. I would make this point. The Pacific Islands Forum leaders have made clear that they want the Pacific to be an ocean of peace. We believe this test is inconsistent with that objective.
And for more, we're joined by CNA's correspondent Deborah Wong, joining us live from Shenzhen. Deborah, beyond the military capability itself, what message do you think Beijing is exactly trying to send to the region and the wider Indo-Pacific?
I think it's quite clear here, the message that Beijing is trying to send is that it's not to be underestimated. We're seeing the statements coming out of China being very carefully phrased as not giving anything away, in fact, just simply saying that it's a routine exercise in compliance with international law and that it's not targeting any country or party. But despite this message, of course, we've seen reactions coming out from regional powers like Australia, New Zealand, Japan, all condemning the move, saying that it's destabilizing to the region. It also warned countries, China has warned countries not to read too much into the launch. This is what we've seen from the press briefing under the Ministry of Foreign Affairs this afternoon. However, the criticisms are still coming in. Now, there are two key events happening right now, which analysts say could have triggered such a test launch. Australia, in fact, just signed a defense pact with Fiji in what observers are saying could limit China's influence in the region. And of course, the world's largest naval exercise, the US-led RIMPAC, is also happening right now from the 24th of June to the 31st of July. It's a very long exercise that happens once every 2 years. And Professor Alejandro Reyes from the Hong Kong University said that with that as a context, China's missile launch is not surprising, given the increasing military activity in the region in the Pacific, with security networks, in fact, building up more and more, and China seen as a primary adversary. I also spoke with Dr. Yang Zi from RSIS. Let's hear more.
Given the timing, right now the RIMPAC exercise is occurring, and during this time, China is trying to flex its military muscles, highlight the point that the island chain system and the US-led alliance system in the Asia-Pacific cannot contain China's military capability. Also at this time, we are seeing the US is stuck in a military setback in the Middle East. So China is also trying to test US reactions and the strength of its alliance systems.
Right, as you and the expert just mentioned, there seems to be a lot of significance surrounding the launch that Beijing is trying to convey. What do you think is the significance, whether it be timing or the location? What's there?
Well, the nature of it is quite significant because China rarely conducts tests in international waters. It normally does so in its own territory. And the last time it conducted such a test was in late 2024, at a time where analysts said could have been attributed to rising Sino-US rivalry as well as cross-strait tensions, given that William Lai was in that same year elected as Taiwan's leader. So such a move this time round again is sure to attract a lot of international attention, scrutiny over what was launched, how and where the test was conducted. Let's hear more from Dr. Yang.
It is the first time that China launched a SLBM from the Pacific. Last time was late 2024 when it launched a missile from Hainan Island. I would say that, it shows that the PLA's capability is expanding, and the message it is trying to send to the world is that China must not be underestimated. We should wait and see if China initiates similar missile tests in the coming month. Then it would be an act of escalation and definitely draws significant concerns. But a single test is more about sending a message rather than, forcing tensions upon the region.
Professor Reyes from HKU also told me that the fact that it was a submarine launch also demonstrates China's mobility in its defense forces. It's also harder to neutralize, and it's able to operate wider across the Pacific. Now, it's all part of China's goal to speed up its military capabilities, especially as its PLA turns 100 next year. In fact, President Xi Jinping also reinforced this most recently on the 1st of July as China marks 105 years of its Communist Party, saying that a world-class army is necessary to protect its sovereignty as well as retain its economic self-interest. Back to you.
Well, thanks for those updates. That was CNA's correspondent Deborah Wong speaking to us live from Shenzhen. And as Deborah noted, the Chinese intercontinental ballistic missile test in the Pacific comes as Australia signs a new defense alliance with Fiji, binding the two nations to come to each other's aid if either is attacked. Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese sealed the Ocean of Peace Pact with his Fijian counterpart during a trip to the Pacific Island nation. And under this deal, the two nations will consult each other over any security-related developments that threatens their sovereignty.
Today, Australia and Fiji have come together as two proud sovereign nations to conclude not one but two treaties, the Vuvali Union and the Ocean of Peace Alliance. Combined, these treaties represent one of the most significant endeavours Australia has ever undertaken in our history with any country.
These landmark agreements mark a very significant elevation of our bilateral relationship into a new era of strategic partnership.
Australia has been seeking to boost its security ties across the Pacific amid growing concerns about possible Chinese military presence in the region. That is, after China signed a security pact with the Solomon Islands in 2022. Canberra has since signed several agreements with other nearby countries, including Papua New Guinea and Vanuatu.
中国同太平洋岛国开展合作，始终秉持相互尊重、平等相待、互利共赢、开放包容的原则。我们不搞地缘博弈，不谋求政治私利。希望有关国家切实尊重岛国独立自主，聚焦岛国经济社会可持续发展，不针对第三方，不损害第三方的利益。
And Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi is set to arrive in Indonesia for the first leg of a three-nation tour. Leaders are expected to deepen cooperation across defense, maritime security, and critical minerals amid intensifying competition in the Indo Pacific. The visit will mark Mr. Modi's first trip to Indonesia since the two countries elevated ties to comprehensive strategic partnership in the year of 2018. Mr. Modi will hold talks with Indonesian President Prabowo Subianto in Jakarta tomorrow before traveling to Yogyakarta. Both sides are also expected to announce agreements covering healthcare, pharmaceuticals, education, space, and digital connectivity. Discussions on expanding trade and investment are also set to feature prominently. Defense cooperation will be in sharp focus, with talks on India's BrahMos supersonic missile system under close scrutiny. The Indonesian stop opens Mr. Modi's wider Indo Pacific tour, which also includes Australia and New Zealand. And for more, we are joined by Ishan Garg, who's covering the story for CNA from New Delhi. Ishan, explain to us how significant this visit is for India's Indo Pacific strategy at a time when China is becoming increasingly assertive across the region.
Well, India's vision of the Indo-Pacific is hugely centered around how it wants to build new partnerships, and that's what the Indian Ministry of External Affairs says, that the common theme running between Prime Minister's visit to Indonesia and then on to Australia and New Zealand is going to be forging new areas of cooperation with these countries. But analysts do see China and China's influence as a major theme that's uniting India's many diplomatic engagements before and coming up in the next few days. When the Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi was in New Delhi, the free and Indo-Pacific region as a concept was discussed between the two leaders, and it is something that is expected to be discussed between Prime Minister Narendra Modi and President Prabowo Subianto. And once again, the issue of Chinese influence in the region could also come up when Prime Minister Modi visits Australia and meets the leader there, Anthony Albanese. To certainly, China and the influence in the region is a big part of conversations that the nations want to talk about. In similar light, analysts also say that India might also want to talk to Indonesia about cooperating more on critical minerals technology. Indonesia has one of the world's largest reserves of nickel and other critical minerals such as tin and cobalt, and India might want to use those resources for its own electric vehicles and defense industries. Finally, there's also likelihood of the two countries talking about connecting infrastructure between India's Andaman and Nicobar Island and the Sabang area in Indonesia. And the idea would be to enhance maritime cooperation, which includes things like surveillance and keeping an eye on trade flowing through two of the most important crucial trade points in the entire region, which is the Strait of Malacca and the area around the Lombok Islands in Indonesia. So the idea of Chinese influence very key to Prime Minister Modi's visits to Indonesia and then on to Australia and New Zealand as well.
Right, so trade, critical minerals, also considering China's influence in the region, many things on the agenda there, but are there any concrete outcomes that we can look forward to?
Well, the big one is going to be certainly defense cooperation pact between India and Indonesia. Under it, the big ticket item that we are expecting to see is the process of the BrahMos missile that India produces, the supersonic cruise missile, to be sold to Indonesia. Reports here are saying that India could be in talks with Indonesia to not only sell those missile systems, but also ink a pact that would see Indian cadets and Indonesian cadets being trained jointly, which would enhance enhance their interoperability at sea and also on land. Apart from that, we are also likely to see cooperation in the fields of digital payment system being unified between India and Indonesia. And we understand that New Delhi also wants a closer tie-up with Indonesia in the fields of pharmaceuticals as well. Apart from this, there's also a likelihood that the two countries could discuss food security and cooperation. New Delhi certainly wants to support the idea in Indonesia, and we also understand that India would want to promote its own digital public infrastructure as a case study for Indonesia, where President Prabowo Subianto wants to use digital public infrastructure to provide welfare schemes to people. So multiple items on the agenda, some that concern geopolitics, but also others that concern common people.
All right. Thank you so much for those updates. That was Ishan Garg reporting for CNA from New Delhi. And we'll head out for a short break, but coming up on East Asia Tonight, SK Hynix is seeking billions of dollars to expand its AI chip business. We'll explain what's at stake. And another South Korean tech heavyweight, Samsung, is rewarding its chip employees after a strong first half. But fresh labor tensions are brewing. We'll have more when we come back. Welcome back. It's time for Olivia Marzuki to bring us up to speed with the latest business news. Liv, one Asian economy is making a major change to how its currency is being treated, right?
That's right, Grace. We are tracking a significant development out of South Korea as the won is making headlines now. South Korea opened a new chapter on how it's being traded, and we are looking at today South Korea facilitating a 24-hour onshore spot dollar-won trading. The move is an attempt by the government to improve access to Korean markets, particularly for offshore investors. Now, that is part of Seoul's broader push to secure developed market status from global index provider MSCI. Now, let's look at where the won and the equity market currently stand. The Korean won swung between gains and losses before hovering at levels around 1,532 against the greenback, and the benchmark Kospi giving up short-lived gains to end the day in the red by about 0.5%. For more insights, we are joined now by Mito Kotecha, head of FX and EM macro strategy at Barclays. Mito, thank you so much for being here with us. Now, let's start from the new era of Korean won's round-the-clock trading. Why now? And how much difference do you think will that make to the currency's global standing?
I think it will make a marked difference. The fact that it's happened now is it's clearly a process that's been ongoing in Korea to try and improve the liquidity, the ability to hedge, and of course to move towards MSCI developed market status. So in that sense, it's a step in the right direction, and I think it will help some of the ability to trade more liquidly for the Korean won. Before, investors or companies had to hedge through the NDF market outside of the opening hours. The fact that now it's 24 hours means that those sort of glitches in liquidity and potential lack of liquidity periods that we've seen in the past may now not be there. It may also dampen some of the volatility in dollar Korea outside of previous trading hours. So again, it's a step in the right direction. It does help in the move towards overall MSCI developed market status.
All right, Mito, sounds like there's more upsides there. Could this inspire or push other Asian economies then to follow suit?
It could, and certainly I think a lot of countries in Asia will be watching very closely how this experiment pans out. Korea, of course, is in some ways a little bit more different. It is more up the developed market chain anyway. Clearly, there is more liquidity in Korean won. Korean equity markets, of course, have seen huge investments in the past, and is clearly one of the big markets that foreign investors look at in Asia. So it does stand out for a number of reasons. But nonetheless, with these markets in Asia, where many central banks use the NDF market, it will be interesting to see whether this could be copied elsewhere.
All right, Mito, I know it's been a day, so it's hard to tell, but do you expect this reform to have a lasting impact on South Korea's competitiveness as a financial center, Or is it just one piece of a much larger puzzle?
I think it's a latter. It's definitely a positive step. It is one piece, though, in a larger puzzle. I think Korea has been doing a lot in terms of trying to open up its markets, in terms of liquidity, in terms of trading, in terms of allowing access to the onshore market. So the fact that there has been this now 24-hour trading ability of the dollar Korea market is a plus. But again, it's one step. It's not the concrete and all-encompassing measure, but it's another step in the right direction.
All right, Mitchell, let's broaden our horizon here a little bit. Let's talk Chinese yuan, which has been remarkably stable so far. Do you see that resilience sustainable in the second half of the year?
We do. I mean, our view is that the yuan will continue to gradually strengthen. One thing we have been saying is that we don't expect that same sort of pace of appreciation that we saw over the last year to continue in the next year. Chinese yuan appreciated by about 6% against the dollar. We're probably looking at somewhere around half or slightly below that. You have to bear in mind that the dollar itself is quite strong, so it'd be quite hard for the yuan to appreciate. There's also some pushback from our perspective from China in terms of the appreciation pace, not the direction. And also, at the same time, Chinese exports and trade balance remain super strong. Last year, China saw a $1.2 trillion trade surplus. This year, it could be even larger than that. So exporters will continue to convert their dollar holdings. That will provide some positive support for the yuan, but we just don't think it's going to be as quick as we saw last year.
All right, staying in East Asia, let's talk about Japanese yen now. It has strengthened pretty much this year. Do you see more leg up for it?
Our view is generally that the dollar will remain firm against the yen in the next several months, and we could see more upside in dollar yen. That said, look, we've been trading above 162. There is clearly concern about intervention from Japanese authorities. We've seen some strong language towards the end of last week from various officials in Japan. So there is a risk of intervention that could temporarily push dollar yen lower. But overall, in the medium term, it's very hard to see dollar yen turn around unless that we see an aggressive move higher in policy interest rates. And that's something that we don't expect. Or the dollar more broadly falls considerably from here. And again, that's something we also don't expect. One other angle could be repatriation from offshore investors. But so far, there's been no real sign of that. So for now, dollar yen remains well supported, even with the risk of intervention.
Fascinating stuff. Thank you so much for your insights today. Mitsuko Techa, head of FX and EM macro strategy at Barclays. Circling back to South Korea, memory chip giant SK Hynix is launching a U.S. listing today as it looks to capitalize on the AI boom and raise $28 billion. The company will sell more than 17 million new shares in depository receipts, with 10 ADRs representing one common share at a price to be revealed later. The listing comes amid volatile trading amongst memory chip stocks over renewed concerns about the sustainability of that AI boom. Now, the deal could become the biggest ever ADR offering and would make it the second largest share sale. SK Hynix says it will use the proceeds to build factories and buy chip-making equipment. And Samsung Electronics is expected to report another blockbuster quarter as the AI boom continues to fuel demand for memory chips. Advanced estimates for operating profit stand at $56.4 billion. That's up nearly 18 times from a year ago. If confirmed, it could mark the company's third straight quarter of record operating profit. The surge is being driven by a global shortage of memory chips used in AI servers, pushing prices sharply higher. Samsung supplies memory chips to big tech companies including NVIDIA, Google, and Apple. Analysts say that growing demand for complex AI systems is increasing the need for both high-performance memory and storage. Samsung releases its preliminary earnings on Tuesday, with full results due later this month. Investors will also be watching its long-term investment plans, including the $2 trillion earmarked to expand chip production in South Korea through 2040. While Samsung shares reversing earlier losses, ending the day almost 3% firmer. And Samsung employees in the lucrative chip division have a reason to cheer ahead of tomorrow's results. They will receive a performance bonus of 100% of their base salary for the first half of this year. That's on top of another special bonus reached after a union strike in May. Under that deal, the company will pay its chip workers company stock equal to 10.5% of earnings over a period of at least 10 years. The payments will be made on Wednesday. But not everyone is happy, with the union representing employees from the appliance unit planning to hold a rally. South Korea's chip industry has brought in a windfall for the country, with the government planning to create an investment fund from the extra tax revenue. A top official says the fund will be used to support President Lee Jae-myung's 3 mega projects, creating future growth engines, addressing the K-shaped polarization in the economy, and supporting the younger generations. And that's all I have for business. Grace, it's back to you.
Thanks, Liv, for those updates in business. Now, coming back on East Asia tonight, we'll report on how more than just computing chips. We'll be speaking with correspondent Victoria Jen on how Taiwan is making inroads to industries beyond semiconductors. You're joining us on East Asia tonight, and here are the headlines we're following. China confirms the successful test firing of a nuclear-capable missile from a submarine in the Pacific, sparking criticism from Japan, Australia, and New Zealand. Australia and Fiji ink a new treaty committing the two nations to come to each other's aid if either is attacked, this prompting China to urge for the respect for the Pacific nation's sovereignty and not to target third parties. Meantime, South Korea begins round-the-clock trading of its currency nearly every day, a move chip makers and other big exporters expect will help them manage exchange rate risks and improve pricing. Taiwan may be best known for semiconductors, but beyond chips, other industries are building global reputations of their own, whiskey being one of them. In a market long dominated by Scotland and Japan, Taiwanese producers are now making their mark. And CNA senior correspondent Victoria Jen reports in the first of our 3-part series on Taiwan's industries beyond semiconductors.
Taiwan is not an obvious place to make whiskey. It's hot, it's humid, and temperatures can swing sharply between seasons. For years, those conditions were seen as a challenge, but at Kavalan Distillery in northeastern Yilan, they became an opportunity.
What we thought was disadvantage turned out to be blessings. When you work with the climate, it actually speeds up the maturation, and it also makes the flavors even more unique and more robust in terms of Kavalan whiskey.
Barrel management is a key part of the process.
STR stands for shaving, toasting, and recharring. We shave a little bit of the inside to remove the unwanted parts. And then we toast to preheat the barrels, at the same time releasing the woody aromas from the oak. And finally, we'll do the recharring to give the layer of char inside of the barrel, and that is going to provide the color of our whiskey, as well as the caramel, toffee, chocolate aromas.
What happens after distillation is just as important. Behind me is Kavalan's warehouse. We're not allowed to film inside. The company says it's off limits to outsiders, but I'm told a key part of the whiskey making process happens in there. Hundreds of thousands of wooden barrels that are used to contain whiskey are stored inside, and temperatures in the warehouse can be adjusted to reach up to 40 degrees Celsius. That high heat is what's needed to bring out the aroma and flavors of the wood, like American oak, which shapes the taste of the whiskey fast. Kavalan was founded in 2005. But its global breakthrough came a decade later, when one of its whiskeys was named world's best single malt. The results surprised the industry. It marked a turning point for Taiwan's whiskey.
台湾的熟成数有可能是苏格兰的3、4倍哦。换言之，就是说，这个威士忌在台湾很可能熟成了3年或4年，有可能等同于苏格兰威士忌的12年跟15年的风味。
Since expanding in 2016, Kavalan's capacity has risen to around 10 million bottles per year, making it one of the world's largest single malt producers. Its whiskeys are now sold in more than 30 markets worldwide. Around 40% of sales come from overseas.
Our top markets are spread out through Asia and Europe. So, for example, Japan and Korea are really strong markets. Singapore is a market that we pay really close attention to as well. In terms of Europe and America, we have a strong presence and we're becoming stronger there too. So yeah, our goal is to expand in terms of production, in terms of effort. We are always looking to explore new markets outside of Taiwan.
Kavalan remains the dominant producer in Taiwan for now, but others, including Omar Whiskey, are also gaining recognition. There are currently 4 homegrown commercial whiskey distilleries on the island.
我们很明显看到啊，这个世界不管是威士忌市场、葡萄酒市场，许许多多的精品的市场都越来越多样化跟多元化。所以我们过去会很尊重一些过去古老的威士忌产区，他们这种经过100年的努力而传承下来的风味，这是非常值得尊敬的风味。但很明显的，我们在威士忌市场上看到越来越百花齐放。
Despite its relatively small population, Taiwan is also a major whiskey consuming market per capita. Having no tariffs on whiskey imports has also supported demand.
第一个，首先是台湾是很重要的消费的区域。我们这里的人喝威士忌喝得非常的多，量跟值上面几乎都是名列前茅的状况，所以也这样子造就了包括苏格兰，包括许多的威士忌的生产国度非常在意这块市场。还有属于我们本来的文化当中有喝烈酒的文化之外，台湾的环境是地小人稠，所以在推广威士忌的知识跟文化上面其实比较容易的。
As consumers look beyond traditional whiskey regions, Taiwan's producers believe their global story is still unfolding.
For more, we're joined by CNA senior correspondent Victoria Jen live from Taipei for more details on Taiwan's local industries. Victoria, this is your first series of this Taiwan Beyond Semiconductors, and living up to that name, when we first think of Taiwan, we usually think about semiconductors, but what prompted you to pursue a series on something more, whether that be coffee, chocolate, and for this time, whiskey?
That's right. When people think of Taiwan, they think of chips, and for good reason. The semiconductor industry accounts for about 15% of Taiwan's economy. Semiconductors make up more than 1/3 of Taiwan's exports, and Taiwan produces over 60% of the world's chips and more than 90% of the most advanced ones. But Taiwan is much more than semiconductors. I wanted to show another side of the island that's often overlooked. There are many small industries here that are making world-class products. Take coffee, for example. Taiwan only grows a small amount of coffee it drinks, but its specialty beans have been selling for some of the highest prices at international auctions. Then there's chocolate. Southern Taiwan has the right tropical climate to grow cacao, and local chocolate makers have won hundreds of international awards. And of course, whiskey. Taiwan wasn't expected to become a whiskey producer because of its hot climate, but companies like Kavalan turned that into an advantage and are now exporting award-winning whiskey around the world. Beyond these, Taiwan is also well known for high mountain tea, orchids, bicycles, and even luxury yachts. Now, these industries are small compared with semiconductors, but they tell another story about Taiwan.
Now, Vic, all three products are producing premium value, whether it be coffee, chocolate, whiskey, but what challenges could they face if they want to expand even further?
Well, one thing that surprised me is that even though these industries are very different, they all face almost the same challenges. The biggest one is cost. Taiwan has limited land, labor is expensive, and production is relatively small. And that means whether you're growing coffee in the mountains, cacao in Pingdong, or making whiskey in Yilan, it's very difficult to compete on price. So instead, they compete on quality. They're producing premium products with strong branding and unique stories, targeting customers who are willing to pay more. Now, climate is another challenge. Farmers told us that more extreme weather, including droughts, heavy rain, and typhoons, is making it harder to grow crops consistently. At the same time, they're facing more competition from producers around the world. And another challenge is international recognition. Making a great product is only half the job. They also need people overseas to know about it. So that's why branding, tourism, and exports have become just as important as production itself. And I think that's what connects all three stories. These industries know they will never be as big as Taiwan's semiconductor industry, and they're not trying to be. Instead, they're finding their own niche and showing that Taiwan can succeed not only through technology, but also through premium products, creativity, and craftsmanship.
And looking forward to hear more about these stories in your next episodes in the three-part series. In the meantime, thank you so much. That was CNA senior correspondent Victoria Jen joining us live from Taipei. And we'll head out for a short break, but coming up on East Asia Tonight, Singapore calls for deeper global cooperation, including with China, in areas ranging from AI to aging. And China is taking another major step in deep space exploration as its probe reaches its asteroid target after a journey of more than 1 billion kilometers. Singapore and China should deepen cooperation in the use of AI, energy resilience, and caring for an aging population. These were 3 points raised by Singapore's National Development Minister, Chee Hong-tat, at this year's Singapore-China Forum. Mr. Chee says no country has all the answers or resources to tackle today's challenges alone. Instead, nations should remain open, learn from one another, and work on practical solutions that benefit both sides.
It is in this spirit that Singapore and China can look forward to continuing to expand and deepen our collaboration, building on the strong foundations that generations before us have laid over the years. These bilateral partnerships need not stop at our borders. The lessons learned and the solutions developed can ripple outward, benefiting the wider region and the world.
In a later discussion, Mr. Chee added that the nature of bilateral partnership will also have to evolve in response to geopolitical shifts. Citing Tianjin, for example, he adds that the cooperation efforts can go beyond green economy and tech, even branching out of developments in the eco-city. The key, he says, is to be flexible and keep up with the times.
以前的那个合作项目是很多是把新加坡企业带到中国去投资，可是这个也要改变。 因为现在的中国企业很多都想走出去，也有能力走出去，把他们的科技、他们的产品带到海外市场。所以我们希望能够做到的是，新加坡现在也可以和中国的合作呢，扩展到帮助中国的企业通过新加坡成为一个区域枢纽，然后扩展到东南亚的其他的市场去。
Mr. Chee also responded to questions on why Singapore had remained silent over the collapsed Meta Manus deal. The proposed acquisition of the Singapore-headquartered AI company was blocked by Chinese regulators over national security concerns. Mr. Chee says no Singaporean law had been broken and he stressed that the country respects the national security priorities of other nations and that such considerations are important for long-term international cooperation.
What Singapore will do is we want to establish ourselves as a trusted place for business and for finance. And to do that, I think disclosure is important, transparency is important, trust is important, and that is the direction that we will take. Not focusing on whether it's a Chinese AI company or American AI company, or for that matter, from any other country, or whether it's AI or another particular technology. That is not our focus.
Singapore and Japan's space agencies agreed to strengthen collaboration in areas such as space technology, exploration, and industry development on Monday. They signed a memorandum of cooperation, the first bilateral space agency agreement between both countries. The agreement, which focuses on the safe, sustainable, and peaceful use of outer space, was inked at a regional conference called Spacetide in Tokyo. The memorandum is part of commitments under the Singapore-Japan Strategic Partnership and comes as the two countries mark 60 years of diplomatic relations. Other partnerships, such as between Nanyang Technological University and FUSIC, a Japanese system development firm, were also signed.
I do see that actually Singapore as a connected node in the Southeast Asia region itself, will be able to bring benefits to Japanese companies who want to expand into this area. Singapore is also a global connectivity hub, which will be able to lend support and open up opportunities for many of the Japanese companies based in Singapore.
And China says its space probe has reached its target after a 400-day journey over more than 1 billion kilometers. The Chinese Space Agency says the Tianwen-2 is now close enough to the Kamo-Olave asteroid to begin investigations. And the probe is part of China's first asteroid sample return mission, seeking to catch up with the U.S. and Japan in deep space exploration. The two nations have already completed their own sample collection missions to different asteroids, and China's Tianwen-2 has captured its first images of the asteroid, which will be used to fine-tune its approach. Scientists will also begin detailed surveys of the asteroid's shape, composition, and internal structure. Once a sample has been collected, the probe will release a module transporting them back to Earth. And if you want more related coverage, do log on to our website, cna.asia, for stories including this one on how asteroids near Earth may hold trillions in untapped metal wealth. The head of South Korea's National Football Federation, Chung Mong-gyu, has stepped down following the national team's disappointing FIFA World Cup exit. And according to local media, he submitted his resignation letter earlier today after chairing his final meeting. Mr. Chung had already said in late May that he would resign after the event ends, but brought forward his departure in the aftermath of the national team's elimination. And Chung had already been under pressure. In 2024, he was under fire for what critics claimed was a lack of transparency in hiring the team's head coach. The Ministry of Culture, Sports and Tourism conducted a probe into the Korean Football Association that year and concluded that Chung and other senior officials must be disciplined over a series of irregularities. And for more, let's bring in CNA senior correspondent Lee Myung-suk live from Seoul. Myung-suk, Chung Mong-gyu had already said he would resign after the World Cup, but why are South Koreans so angry with him and, more broadly, the whole system?
Well, on the surface, it could look like this is simply because South Korea lost to Mexico and South Africa and failed to make it out of the, make it to the next round. But the anger that led to these resignations has been building up for years here. Now, it goes back to 2024 and how Hong Myung-bo got the coaching job. Now, many fans and critics believed that the hiring process wasn't transparent then and that Chung Mong-gyu had improperly influenced the selection process. Now, that led to a police investigation, a parliamentary hearing, and even a government probe. Now, the Korean Football Association challenged the government's findings in court, but it lost. And then in April this year, the Seoul court ruled that the ministry had acted lawfully, and the court also pointed to the serious flaws in the coach selection process, including the improper intervention by Mr. Chung. So when fans, you saw the fans booing at the head coach, the former head coach Hong Myung-bo at the airport and holding up banners saying that South Korean football is dead, it wasn't really about the 3 matches at this World Cup alone, but it was really about years of frustration with the system that many fans here believe lacks the transparency and accountability. And so even President Lee Jae-myung added to that pressure, saying that the World Cup failure reflected the deeper problems in how Korean football is run. And that's why, this became much more than just a sports story here in South Korea.
Exactly. It wasn't just about the early exit with a star squad. It was more about the institution and the governance behind KFA. But do you think that Chung's resignation, as well as the departure of head coach Hong Myung-bo, was enough? Or are South Koreans now demanding even more broader reforms at the Korea Football Association?
Well, definitely, I think it is not going to be enough. Most people here don't think that Chung Mong-gyu stepping down and Hong Myung-bo, resigning is going to end the story. And if anything, it could really be the beginning of the next chapter in Korea's football history. Because just hours after Mr. Chung stepped down, a new body has been set up called the K-Football Innovation Committee. And it held its first meeting today. And one notable appointment there is Park Ji-sung as the co-chair. Now, he is one of the most respected former players here in South Korea. And so many fans here are hoping that bringing him in could give this reform effort more credibility. And also, one thing very interesting was that the government seems aware of how this could look, because the culture minister was originally going to be co-chairing this committee himself, but he stepped back before the first meeting, and he handed this role instead to the head of the Korea's Olympic Committee, saying that he wanted to avoid any perception that the South Korean government was overstepping into KFA's affairs. But I think the big question now is who will be taking over the Korean Football Association, because under its rules, one of the vice presidents becomes the acting president, and a new election must be held within 60 days. And there's already this debate over, how that election process should be done. And you have President Lee Jae-myung calling for direct elections, while the Korean Sport and Olympic Committee will also be meeting later this month to review this and see what kind of changes needs to be made. And so, I think also one thing that we have to be aware is that fans here will be watching this very closely. And so, what South Koreans want now isn't simply new leaders for the Football Association or even the head coach, but they do want to see changes being made. And they want to see how this is done. And they want, someone to be responsible, taking responsibility when something goes wrong. And so I think this is going to be a real test for South Korea's football in the future.
And hopefully those changes kick in before the 2027 AFC Asian Cup. So in the meantime, thank you so much for those insights. That was CNA senior correspondent Lee Myun-suk joining us live from Seoul. And that's all we have for East Asia Tonight for this Monday. But thank you so much for joining us. And don't forget headlines anytime at cna.asia. Plus, we're on Facebook and YouTube. For our Singapore audience, do stay on for more highlights from the FIFA World Cup matches.
A World Cup classic at the Azteca as Mexico hosted England in the last 16 following a 1-hour rain delay and found themselves a goal down after 36 minutes off a Jude Bellingham diving header. And just 2 minutes after that, Bellingham bundled it in for his brace. The co-hosts pulled one back in the 42nd minute as the English held on to go into the break 2-1 ahead. England were reduced to 10-9 minutes after the restart, but the Three Lions restored their 2-goal lead after a foul by Mexico's goalkeeper in the box. Captain Harry Kane once again delivering from the spot on the hour mark for his 6th of the tournament. But Kane's 69th minute foul in the box gave Mexico a penalty, which Raul Jimenez put away to set up a tense finish. Put under pressure by the partisan home crowd, the Three Lions had to weather wave after wave of Mexican attacks, holding on for the 3-2 win to roar into the quarterfinals, eliminating the co-hosts from the tournament. Well, England play Norway next, who earlier stunned Brazil in their last 16 match in New Jersey. The Vikings beating the 5-time world champions through an Erling Haaland brace in the 78th and 90th minutes. Neymar pulled one back from the spot deep into injury time before announcing his international retirement. That goal too late as Brazil crashed out at the last 16 for the first time since 1990, while the Vikings continue their march into the quarterfinals.